Hello, this is the session on urban research. Sorry for starting late, but we were told to start late. It is also true that we were not ready to start on time, but still, we were told, just start a bit late. While much of the world struggles for space, we have this precious abundance of space in here. What I want to propose is very short presentations, and as you can see, we don't, we'll just do it speaker by speaker, and we'll follow each speaker with about 5 minutes of questions. And you can also make comments where the speaker does not need to respond to, because I think of urban research nowadays as an unstable field, and I find that good, I find that interesting. So it is a collective effort to reinvent at least some of the categories for analyses, to try to understand what is going on. In the last 20 years, we have seen events in urban space that have hit our imaginations as researchers, as political beings, etc. And so I think that the field is a bit open. When I put this panel together, I insisted that we have a panel that would include also very young researchers. So we have everything. We have very senior scholars like Professor Teresa Caldeira from Berkeley and Brazil. And we have very junior scholars. So we will start with Teresa Caldeira, who you have some information about her in the program. She is in anthropology in the Department of City and Regional Planning at the University of California in Berkeley. She's the author of a much acclaimed book, City of Walls, Crime, Segregation, and Citizenship in Sao Paulo. And she will talk about her current research, and you will see what it is. Do you want to talk from there? That's better, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Is the light okay for you with visuals?
Yes, and I
okay, very
yes, good. And it works. Great, thank you. Thank you Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, Sasha, for organizing this panel. It's a big pleasure to be here today. And I want to take this opportunity in which we're gathering to discuss emergent trending in urban research to take the trope peripheries as a means to explore some new ways to understand cities and from the perspective of the global South. Urban theory has been modeled on the analysis of cities of the North Atlantic, but as most of the current process of intense urbanization happen elsewhere, we urgently need other perspectives of analysis that can capture different logics of urbanization. Thus, I take peripheries as a means of engaging simultaneous investigations of process of social spatial formation and theory making. I suggest that the notion peripheries has the potentiality of freeing us from ways of framing urban research and theorizing that are all too common, but that in fact prevent us from seeing several characteristics of the social spatial formations we encounter in most metropolis of the contemporary world, as they have been conceived to explain other logics of the urban. Peripheries allow us to highlight what has been bypassed by other practice of urban categorization. Peripheries are not slums or favelas or the most precarious types of space, although they may contain all of these. They are not the only type of space inhabited by the poor worldwide, but they are quite prevalent type. In the way I conceive of them, peripheries refer to a process of spatial and social formation, and as such, they may be everywhere, not necessarily on the fringes of metropolitan regions. Many of the large metropolises of the world today, especially metropolises in the global South, grow to a process of peripheral formation. This does not mean only or necessarily that they grow by expanding towards the hinterland. Rather, it means that they grow through a process that I call auto-construction, following the Brazilian term for it. Auto-construction is a mode of producing the urban in which residents build by themselves their spaces in a long process of continuous improvement. It is simultaneously a process of urbanization and of the constitution of citizens. Peripheries are spaces in the making. They are always being transformed. For long periods of time, people inhabit spaces that are clearly precarious and unfinished, but they do this with the expectation, frequently realized, that the spaces will improve and that one day they will be as urbanized as wealthier parts of the city. In this process, residents are agents of the process of urbanization, not simply consumers of spaces developed by others. They construct their houses and their cities according to the resources they are able to put together each moment. Peripheral landscapes are marked by a combination of infrastructure of quite different levels of completion and elaboration, and therefore are quite heterogeneous. The transformations are simultaneously expressed in the conditions of the urban spaces and of the houses. With time, not only the neighborhood grows, but also streets get to be asphalted, get water, electricity, and sewage, local commerce expand, and new technologies, such as the cell phone and the internet, enlarge the possibilities of interaction and the universe of choices. Simultaneously, with time, facades are improved, houses are enlarged, and especially they are constantly redecorated, as their residents not only make them more comfortable, but also exercise their aesthetic judgments and adapt their taste to different fashions and consumer options. Houses are the best testament of residents' creativity and investments in their own spaces. Despite indisputable precariousness, the process of transformation of peripheral areas offer a model for social mobility, as they become the material embodiment of notions of progress and evolution. Spaces crystallize change and improvement. The fact that there is significant amount of improvisation does not mean that peripheries are either totally unplanned and chaotic or illegal. In fact, they may be quite orderly, although unfinished. Auto-construction does not mean absence of the state. Peripheries are spaces where citizens and governments are enmeshed in complicated ways. The state regulates, writes plans, provides infrastructure and services, polices, negotiates, and recently has started to upgrade deteriorated spaces, regardless of their legal status. However, each of these activities may be done in precarious or inadequate terms. Many peripheral and auto-constructed spaces involve a good amount of planning and regulation. Neza in Mexico City, for instance, was built on a perfect grid, as were many other peripheral areas around Latin America. Countless neighborhoods in peripheries have been laid down either by developers or by the government according to clear designs. But they have been occupied and built up by residents themselves in an even process, depending on their possibilities. Auto-constructors try to follow city ordinance and regulations, such as setbacks, sidewalk alignments, etc., even again unevenly. The results are spaces that are simultaneously organized and unfinished, but in which the expectation is always of future completion and constant improvement. There is a broad agreement in the literature about housing in the so-called developing world that both irregularity and illegality are the most common means through which the poor settle in cities and in fact urbanize them. Frequently, illegality and irregularity are the only options available for the poor to become urban dwellers, given that formal housing is not affordable and public housing is not sufficient. The conditions of irregularity regarding land tenure and constructions vary widely and involve numerous layers of complication. They may range from straight swindling of private property to lack of building permits, from corruption in the allocation of communal or state-owned land to failure to follow municipal codes. But although there may be a good amount of irregularity regarding land tenure and land use in peripheral areas, peripheries are not necessarily illegal and usually not invaded areas. Even when they are, illegality is a complex issue and usually does not result from residents taking land that is not their own, but rather from them being swindled by developers. Whatever the case, though, the legal status is frequently also a matter of transformation. Residents bet on the possibility of legalization and regularization, and most frequently either succeed in seeing it happen or see no consequence from inhabiting irregular spaces. In sum, to try to subsume the highly differentiated and always evolving spaces of the peripheries into static, simplistic, and homogenizing notions, such as illegality, or to call them slums, is to miss entirely the central fact about them, that they are spaces in the making, spaces of creativity, improvisation, and constant transformations, and that they are spaces constituted by practice that do not coincide of those of the official city. Peripheries are not contained. They always bleed throughout the city. Their residents must circulate, go to work, go to school, find health treatment, get service from the state, protest, catch up a rap concert, or simply survive. In the same way as social movements originated in the peripheries have spread everywhere and became crucial for process of democratization from Brazil to South Africa, the movements and cultural production originated in peripheries have been making the culture of cities, have been marking the culture of cities everywhere. One of the most emblematic of these forms of cultural production is graffiti. The hip-hop culture of which it is part is today probably the most widespread type of peripheral culture worldwide. Rap, graffiti, and tagging are encountered in city after city. They infiltrate in all sorts of space to signal social inequality. In São Paulo, where the city has passed a unique law that prohibits billboards and advertisements in public spaces and was incredibly successful in informing it, pichação, the São Paulo style of tagging, became the most evenly distributed type of sign in the metropolitan region. Pichação homogenizes the most diverse types of spaces in every direction of the city. With pichação in graffiti, those who have been kept outside of the dominant cultural systems master new styles and transgressively and powerfully transform the character of public space by spreading them everywhere. Peripheries are also spaces of creativity, transformation, and movement, but they are also spaces of violence and abuses, making everyday life for most a stressful endeavor. This violence has usually two sides. On the one hand, in many peripheral areas of metropolis all around the world, rates of violent crime, especially murder, are incredibly high and usually much higher than in richer areas. But in some cities, they remain puzzlingly low. As a famous rap from São Paulo puts it, brother, we're killing each other. Why? A common response to high rates of violence is more violence, this time from the police. Thus, on the other hand, in peripheries everywhere, from Los Angeles to Paris, São Paulo, and Johannesburg, police work is marked by abuse against citizens, especially young men and especially black people, and members of discriminated against ethnic groups. Thus, rates of police violence and killings of civilians can be absurdly high in peripheral areas. Protests and riots associated with police abuse are common, but in many areas, the involvement of citizens in various local organizations, from hip-hop to diverse religious groups, has also proved quite efficient in bringing down rates of violence. The instabilities of conditions of tenure, the skewed presence of the state, the precariousness of infrastructures and service, the constant abuse of residents by the institutions of order, and several processes of stigmatization and discrimination are at the basis of the fact that peripheries in many parts of the world are spaces of invention of new democratic practices. They are thus what James Holson calls the spaces of insurgent citizenship. Movements organized from the peripheries are at the root of democratization process in several parts of the world. Social movements and grassroots organizations from peripheries have created new discourses of rights and put forward demands that are the basis of the rise of new citizenships, the formulation of new constitutions, the experimentation with new forms of local administration, the invent of new approaches to social policy, such as the minimum income grants, for example, the emergence of democratic innovations in planning, law, and citizen participation, and the development of new national societies. Thus, peripheries are spaces in which residents engage in process of construction that constitute then simultaneously into new kinds of urban residents, new kinds of consumers, new kinds of subjects, and new kinds of citizens. These engagements, however transformative they may be, obviously are not able to affect considerably the gap that separates peripheries and their residents from other spaces and social groups, a gap that has been increasing recently, both in terms of the disparity of quality of urban space and of the income and research and resources of social groups. Therefore, to think from the perspective of peripheries is to affirm creativity and insurgent citizenship. But it's also to take inequality as the organizing logic of cities and of the relationships between cities. The term peripheries carries intrinsically a sense of subordination, of being secondary and on the margins, away from the center. To focus on peripheries means to force urban analysis to consider how inequality structures both the internal configuration of cities and relationships among cities, and also how complex are the specific configurations of inequality. As I have been arguing, peripheries are spaces of vitality, creativity, movement, as well as of poverty, discrimination, and violence. To focus only on one side of these aspects is to miss the complexity of contemporary metropolis and deliver reductive and spectacular imaginaries, such as those imaginaries of misery that Mike Davis keeps giving us, denigrating the spaces of the poor and reaping then of their dignity. To focus on inequality does not mean to spectralize misery. The attention to practice of inequality in existence of unequal logics of urban formation poses interesting challenges both for urban theory and for the formulation of urban policies, as it exposes different logics of the urban. How can we talk from the perspective of the peripheries and still maintain a view of the broader metropolis with its diverse logics and relations of inequality? If cities are constituted by dissimilar logics that coalesce to configure unequal patterns of urbanization, what are the possibilities available for planners, legislators, and government that want to change those patterns in the direction of more equality? How can we pursue issues of social justice? Taking a complex notion of peripheriousness as the perspective for our theorizing and practice, these are some of the questions that I suggest we address. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. This was excellent. We will take a few questions. We have like 5 minutes for discussion. It deserves much more. It really opens up new terrain. I really liked it. Anybody? Yes, come to the mic. And if you want to ask another question, just do form a line, just for the sake of time. Yes, hello, and do introduce yourself.
Yes, I don't know whether this works, but I don't think so.
Oh, yeah. It does.
It
sort
does.
of
Okay.
moves gradually.
My name is Pieter Hoijmeijer. I'm from the Netherlands. I was struck by the wording, you using the word periphery. Now, there is a sort of literature growing on these sort of areas, and I've been working with people from Urban Think Tank from Caracas, which prefer the term informal cities. Actually, they teach at Columbia. Stressing the informal part, making a crossover to informal economy, which sort of seems to bring out more the vitality than terming it periphery. The second question I would have, because you raised some very nice issues on theory, what would it be on urban design? What sort of, in terms of policy or urban design, could actually be a new thing that could support the vitality of the periphery or the informal city?
I think to switch chairs. Yeah, stand there.
Well, I do not want to use the word informal because most of the periphery is formal. It's formal in different ways. Part of it is, if I use informal, I will be restricting, and I do not want to restrict. Because what I want is the heterogeneity of conditions. I do not want to say that it is only informal. Because in the periphery of São Paulo, for example, 80% of the residents are owners of their land. It's quite widespread. So I would be taking out the whole periphery of São Paulo of my consideration if I use something like informal. So I do not want, I want to use a broader term. And, sorry, the second one,
what sort of urban design would it lead
to
bring out the vitality?
Well, the urban design that will bring the vitality is the one that people have been using themselves. I showed you lots of slides. Those are all areas that have been built by their owners. So I think that the best thing designers should do is try to respect the kind of history of that. There are much room for improvement because people, they are like on-the-spot architects, and therefore they can get help. But there are traditions of design. I can show you there are vernaculars that are formed everywhere. You should just try to start from them.
Thank you. Yes, just stay there.
Alan Lavelle from the Social Science faculty in San Jose, Costa Rica. I was interested in going back to the periphery one because you said it is not locational, so it has to be defined in another more substantive fashion. Yeah, I'm wondering, between marginalization, exclusion, informality, and periphery, what is actually what defines it in its internal constitution? And the second point is, since Jorge Montaño wrote on Netzer in 1970s, since John Turner wrote on San Salvador at the beginning of the 70s and through the 70s on these same communities, San Salvador, since Mario Lungo in Salvador wrote on the communities in San Salvador. What is the change in dynamics within this type of community, which in some way could be related to or explained by changing economic conditions from import substitution to globalization? Because these problems have been around for some time in Latin American cities. San Salvador dates from the 60s, and it's been there since then.
Sure.
Yeah, many of those areas that I showed you, like the ones from São Paulo, they exist since the late 1960s. What has not changed is the process that I want to highlight, which is the process of continuous transformation and improvement. And I want to stress improvement because it's not only that they change, it's that they get better. They get infrastructure and the houses are more complete. So there is an incredible process that marks the constructions of cities, I think, everywhere, that it's now becoming more visible than used to be before, because if it takes 30 years to make a final house, it's only after 30 years that you're going to see a clear improvement. But if you keep looking, some of the neighborhoods where I show the before and after pictures have been studied since the late 70s. And they have changed substantially. So this is a long-term process. But is this the way in which cities all over Latin America, and I believe in many other areas too, are formed? It's this continuous improvement. So the newer cities are more precarious. The newer neighborhoods look bad. But the older ones have been considerably transformed. And this is a process of transformation that we have to look at as a process of transformation. And I get really mad when you see only the attention to the new areas and all this discourse of here is the awful conditions of housing in the third world. Obviously, it's not good, but it's important to acknowledge that for these people and for the history of these cities, this process of change is very important. And that's the way in which things are not built like in the United States, that you put the new neighborhood with all the infrastructure together in a year. It's not like this. It's a very long-term process, but it's a very interesting process, exactly because it's a process, I believe, that politicizes its residents. because it is precarious, it's end up politicizing people who live there. And many of the process of democratization in the third world were based on this kind of reality. So,
the last question, and you have to answer very quickly.
I will answer in one.
Well,
I'm afraid it won't lend itself very well to a one-word answer. Nonetheless, I'm Pierre Ritchie. I'm a professor of psychology at the University of Ottawa in Canada and Secretary General of the International Union of Psychological Science. And my question is actually anchored in an initiative that I'm part of that's looking at health and well-being in the changing urban environment. And the question I wanted to, I really appreciated the way you looked at how this process of change, this process of evolution, both potentiates enhanced quality of life as well as the risks that come in this particular environment. And I wanted to ask you if you had any comment at all specifically addressed to health issues in the same spirit. Health, from a broadly social determinants of health perspective, what have been your observations, if any, of those which have moved in the direction of enhancing health and those which present risks to health?
One phrase answer. In Jardim das Camélias, this area where I do research since the 1970s, when I started doing research there, infant mortality rate was 130. Today is less than 20. That's the...
very interesting. Thank you very much. I'm Rita. You want to go? Oh, great, yes. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. I'm Rita Shaw, who is a visiting faculty at the Center for Environmental Planning and Technology. And is it in Ahmedabad? Yes. Okay, in India. And she's also the contributing editor with the Indian Express, which is a great newspaper, actually, right? You did an interview with me, didn't you? Yes, yes, very good. I recommend you read that. She is writing a book on the Indian media. Well, no, you used to, right? Yes. And now you're working on a book on violence, right? In Ahmedabad? On Ahmedabad. Very good. Are you showing slides?
Yes. Okay. Grzewski and Homer Dixon identified three broad categories of urban violence that are relevant to any discussion on the origins of urban conflict and its effects. One is political violence involving both violence directed against the state and violence by the state against challengers. Two is communal and ethnic violence, and three, criminal and anomic violence. In present-day India, it is a little hard to distinguish between these three categories. Most incidents of large-scale violence seem to involve elements of all three. The cause, for instance, could be ethnic, religious, or cultural, but the protest is likely to take the shape of the wanton destruction of private and public property. It is likely to invite the participation of criminals, and the aim, more often than not, is likely to be political. Paul Brass, who studied endemic Hindu-Muslim violence in the university town of Aligarh in North India, believes that all riots are manufactured, and that the very idea of spontaneity is a fiction created to divert attention from what he calls institutionalized riot systems. Riots, according to him, are a product of actions designed to consolidate one community or the other, or both at the local, regional, and national levels, into a cohesive political bloc. Assuming one accepts this argument to be true at all times, even then it does not follow that a riot can be manufactured at any time or everywhere. There is reason to believe that a certain environment is required for the plans of opportunistic politicians in this regard to fructify. In terms of timing, the last 3 decades have been good for perpetrators of violence, particularly communal violence in India. There's generally widespread consensus among those studying the phenomenon that it is linked to the process of urbanization and modernization that India has been undergoing. Ashish Nandi maintains, as India gets modernized, religious violence is increasing. In the earlier centuries, interreligious riots were rare and localized. Somewhere and somehow, religious violence has something to do with the urban industrial vision of life and with the political process the vision lets loose. Studies bear this out. Ashutosh Varshni, who conducted research into statistics of casualties in Hindu-Muslim riots between 1950 and 95, found that riots were an overwhelmingly urban phenomenon. But yet, what he also found was that not all of urban India was affected by violence. Some cities, but in particular 8 cities that he identified, were afflicted by violence again and again, repeatedly, while many other cities remained quite immune to the phenomenon. So what makes a city riot-prone? In this paper, I present a brief profile of one of India's most violent cities in an attempt to find an answer to this question. Ahmedabad, the commercial capital of the western state of Gujarat, is India's 7th largest city with a population of 4.5 million. It is also the city where the largest number of Hindu-Muslim casualties have taken place, casualties in Hindu-Muslim violence have taken place since 1950. Ahmedabad is a 600-year-old pre-colonial city with a long corporate tradition. It was an important stop on the trade route going from the hinterland to the ports of the west and the south. In 1861, the first steam-driven cotton mill was established there, laying the foundations of a modern industrial center. So Ahmedabad was known as a Manchester of the East because of the number of textile mills it had at one point. In 1915, Gandhi decided to settle in Ahmedabad when he returned from South Africa to India. This is an interesting image. People often say that how the city that Gandhi made his home is now one of the most violent cities in the country. It is an interesting contradiction because, and it is used again and again in the sense that if you talk to people outside of Ahmedabad, they will raise the question. But if you look within Ahmedabad, then there's almost a kind of revolt against the kind of peace and non-violence preached by Gandhi. Gandhi also laid an important tradition in the city by stressing on compromise as a way to resolve labor problems. It is an important factor in kind of deciding the culture of the city, which is that anything and everything must be negotiated. Ahmedabadis, by and large, are a pragmatic and commercially minded people. They're extremely enterprising. They might not set up big industries for the large part, but each and every person will kind of be involved in some kind of business or the other. Even a government servant might think of selling handkerchiefs on the train when he goes to work, for instance. All of them invest in the stock market, and they're very proud of their commercial orientation. The city also has strong local traditions of guardianship, for instance. The city's rich consider themselves responsible for the city's welfare. They use their relations with the powers in Delhi. They built institutions of education. Another thing to note is that institutions of education usually stress on applied research rather than pure research. Even education is a way to is an investment, is a way to make money in the future. But the city fathers, at the time that, till about the 60s, they also contributed to keeping Ahmedabad free of any major incident of communal violence. In 1969, all of this changed when a violent and very bloody riot broke out in the city. A very large number of people were killed in just a few days, and it was considered the worst riot in post-independence India. Why did the riots occur? The immediate cause at that point is, of course, a very small conflict over a festive, and at the time of a festival. But again, I think the cause is never, turns out that it's never so important. The background to which this occurred was that this was a time when the textile mills, the textile industry was beginning to decline. The logic of composite making everything in one place seemed to have become unviable. And a large number of power looms and dyeing and manufacturing units had set up on the outskirts of the city. So a new elite was forming, a new middle class was coming into existence. It was also a period in which the Gujarat, the state in which Ahmedabad is, has become a state for the first time. And so it had unleashed regional and linguistic passions which had taken the form of an anti-modernism. The 70s and 80s continued to be a period of great upheaval. As the mills closed down, unemployment increased. The people who lost their jobs, though, after a period of kind of aimlessness, very quickly took up small trades, starting small hawker stalls or driving rickshaws, or they were absorbed in the small-scale employment. Now, this new elite caused a lot of change in the political system. It eased out the Congress party, which was a kind of secular, all-inclusive party, and had been cobbling together a coalition of the underprivileged, and it replaced it with the Hindu right-wing Bharatiya Janata Party. Gujarat was also the first state where the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is a Hindu right-wing party, formed a government on its own. And the state has been seen by people as something of a laboratory for its ideas of militant Hindu ascendancy. After the demolition of the Babri Masjid in '92, riots broke out all over India. But in Ahmedabad, there were riots not just in '92, but all through the '90s. There was curfew in the town for several weeks. In a sense, people kind of got used, as an election candidate recently said, that even the small child, when he was born, kind of learns the word curfew before he learns anything else. In 2002, in a riot that has been, I don't call it a riot, actually it was sort of an incidence of violence, which has come to be extremely well known and by which the state and the city has been marred for the last few years. A train, Hindu pilgrims on a train was set on fire by a mob allegedly of Muslims, and Hindu fundamentalists went on a riot in the city of Ahmedabad. It was a particularly brutal and terrifying riot where rich and poor were targeted. Houses were destroyed in a certain planned way, using gas cylinders to sort of blow up the roofs. So I think the city has seen endemic violence for years, but the aim at this time was almost that people should not come back home to live. They seem to have succeeded in their aim. Ahmedabad has always been an extremely divided city. Even though all castes and communities worked together in the mills at one time, living quarters and socializing was strictly restricted to one's own. This now has kind of, these trends have deepened. The city has expanded. Land has been acquired using particularly innovative public and private partnership. But there has been a kind of way that the city has now come to be. In the old days, everyone lived in the walled city. People began to move out as they got more money. And then slowly they started moving out because of the communal riots. So what you have now is a situation in which Muslims live in... 4 minutes. Oh, okay. I don't know how to mark this out, but the river divides the western prosperous half and the eastern half, which is kind of a more down... People are poorer there, and life is kind of far more gloomy if you see the surroundings and the way it has developed. Now, this segregation is a fertile ground for demonization of the minority community. The media, which is again business-oriented, tends to be extremely sensationalistic, so whipping up news of terrorism or crime and consistently keeping the image of the Muslim as a criminal alive. On the other hand, caste divisions within the Hindu community have softened a bit because of upward mobility offered to the backward castes through the membership of religious sects. In fact, temples too have proliferated at a rapid rate in the city. Another effort at Hinduizing the city is by renaming it. Many are uncomfortable with the reminder that it was established by a Muslim king in 1411, and so efforts have been made to change this by referring to a prior settlement called Karnavati, which has a kind of more safe Hindu-sounding name. All this sort of religious feeling sits comfortably with the futuristic vision shaped by the state's chief minister, Narendra Modi. Narendra Modi, who many hold culpable for much of the violence of 2002, has acquired the status of a demigod almost. He has also tried to kind of recast himself as from being sort of savior of the Hindus, as he termed himself once, to now being a kind of successful administrator. And his vision is to make Ahmedabad another Singapore. This is a picture of the kind of localities that have come up on the outskirts of the city where many of the riot victims have been housed. But the way that Ahmedabad is being remade looks more like this, which is with wide roads, a BRTS system, which many people feel that Ahmedabad doesn't really need. This is the kind of imaginary that if you look on the government, the official website, this is the city that was sought to be created. The interesting...
Shiny floors, over shiny floors.
Yes, in fact, there's an ancient lake, a 15th century lake that was taken over. This is a picture that this is what they want to do with it, and they've actually almost done the same. It was an ancient lake with ancient sort of steps going down, a very serene atmosphere. Bird lovers used to come there, photographers would come there. This is what they've done with it. What they've done is they've taken over the perimeter, put granite over it, made walls so that you can't now look at the lake if you're just passing by. They put very high gates that look almost like stupas, and they're charging 10 rupee per person to enter, which means that it cuts out the casual anyone who wanted to just come by, which was the poor, tends to be again the lower caste and the Muslim. Just a word on the Muslim community that has been, in a sense, pushed into ghettos in the city. They have sort of adapted to a certain kind of level of unspoken threat of violence. The city has been peaceful for the last several years, but again on the periphery, it is not as if the Muslims are living in dire. They started living in these makeshift colonies, but now again, I've been going there kind of every few weeks, and each time I see growth, new shops opening, new businesses coming up, and what they say is that, except for this one communal problem, the chief minister is all right. So basically, this is a city that is sort of relentlessly upwardly mobile. It's a dynamic, relentlessly adaptable city. It is a society that is single-minded in the pursuit of its advancement. And in doing so, it kind of seeks to bend history, bend everything for this one single kind of condition. The result is a certain blandness of culture and experience, in which it is trapped in a world of heightened fantasy, populated on the one hand by a deadly enemy and the other by a heroic leader who will answer to their every need. This perhaps are some of the conditions that make for violence in a city.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Stay there. Any questions? If anybody wants to ask a question or make a comment, please come to the microphone. Well, then I thought at the beginning you made a very interesting analysis which signaled a possible sort of structural shift that might produce the kind of violence. In passing, you also said that inside the city there is an active contestation of Gandhi's. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to check with you that initial part in your paper, is that indeed aiming at explaining the fact that Ahmedabad has become one of the most violent cities in India? It is.
Yeah, I think that Gandhi has become symbolic in the city of a certain weak-mindedness. Yeah. Okay, someone who turns the other cheek is not a good thing at all. Mm-hmm. You have to fight.
Now, it could also be that is used in order to legitimate a certain kind of ruthless violence that is happening, because that means you're the good, strong, not good, but strong. Is that also so? In other words, the underlying structural condition is the one that leads to the violence. The discourse around Gandhi gets used to position that violence and, reinterpret Gandhi. I mean, is the structural fact must be the more foundational in explaining the outcome or not?
Actually, what I think, and I didn't have the time to develop that whole argument, is that this is what is going on in Ahmedabad goes to the heart of India, actually. It's a sort of argument over what India should be. Mm-hmm. And this new kind of force that is coming up is arguing against the Gandhian way, also against the Nehruvian way, the rational, modern. Mm-hmm. It's a kind of anarchy that is almost saying we exist, we will do what we like. I'm not sure it's not a step towards something else.
Yeah. Did you want to have? Yes, please. And do introduce yourself.
My name is Wiebe Bijker, Maastricht University. Does it work?
Yeah, it comes up sort of gradually.
Sorry, the Netherlands. I very much enjoyed your paper.
Thank you.
I'm only asking, I think I heard you say it, I'm only asking for some confirmation. There was a small sentence where you said, I don't like to call it riots. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, and I'm checking whether I heard that right, and I think that was would be a very brilliant summary of everything that you argued, because I think that riots are something like wild, unplanned mob behavior, and I think that you very nicely showed that there is a lot of planning going into the 2002 events. And so my summary of everything that you told us was that it is not a riot, actually, in 2002. Did I understand you
It is not a riot, yes.
Very, very, thank you. Any other questions or? Yes, please do come, both of you, then to the mic. Maybe we take the two questions together, yes.
My name is Ingrid Eide. I'm a sociologist, formerly of the University of Oslo, now retired, and a member of the City Council and INTU's town development, can you imagine? But my question goes to you, looking at the image of urban development of the elite and the, forgive me the term, backwardness of the poorer communities. Now, are the riots there motivated by a fear that they will not be allowed to develop at all, that one day these urban development will come and kind of, as has happened so often in Latin America, a bulldozer will bulldoze them away and they will have no living at all? I mean, or do they have a sense of developing on their own terms, the way we heard in the former lecture, which is it a riot to protest, or is it a riot that should give them action space to develop in a different way?
Actually, I think the riot is by the elite. It's a kind of process that is that comes, sort of results in a certain social engineering. Now, following that, and then when people are pushed out, certain people are pushed out to where they should, where these people want them to be. So if they're pushed out, say, for instance, into the periphery, at that point then, they start a process of gentrification all over again. So, that's the point, actually, which ties up with the earlier speaker, that, yes, that process is sort of, relentless. It just keeps happening. But the riot is actually meant to put people in their places. And an earlier instance in Mumbai, for instance, in '93, there were very bad riots. Again, I would not call that a riot either. But where again they said perhaps land estate, real estate developers were part of the process as one element, so that they could kind of actually say, okay, this area we need to clear out. I'm simplifying matters a bit. It doesn't take place that visibly, but these are theories that have been propounded.
We have one more question, and make it short because we're a bit over.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Puleng Kabula from University of South Africa. When you started, you gave some definitional meanings or aspects of violence.
Yes.
And you alluded to the notion of state violence, communal violence, and religiously motivated violence. But when you're giving your presentation, I wondered if your definitional scope of violence is not limiting the violence that maybe is exposed or exhibited in your presentation. For instance, you talked about caste system as a system of discrimination and violence that creates a hierarchy where the marginal people are in the periphery or pushed to the outskirts, and you gave a shiny surface, which also, for me, exhibits the notion of ecological violence embedded also in anthropocentric understanding of planning or urban. And I'm wondering, could we limit violence to that, to those three aspects that you mentioned? Or could we think of a deeper, structured, and also embedding the multiplicity of violence? Because I see, for example, economic violence in the evictions of those who are poor and cannot contest in the marketplace. But I also see ecological violence, and how can we deepen this notion of violence in such a way that it reveals the contradictions that seem to be exposed in your presentation?
Absolutely. I agree.
She said it right. Yes. We're now, thank you very much, Amrita. We're now going to have two junior scholars from Japan. If you will please come to the stage. In the meantime, let me say that we were meant to have two speakers from Pakistan, from Lahore, Razi Ahmed and Atiq Uddin Ahmed, and their visas were not granted. You know how regularly that happens in a social science conference at somebody's visa, and it was, I will say, Norway's embassy who denied them the visas, and they would have shown a story that is almost the obverse of what Amrita was just describing, in the sense that the wealthy, the prosperous, the glamorous, the gentrified is building outside the city. Now, Lahore is a city, one of the oldest cities, with an extraordinary architectural history, and it is all decaying because it is seen. And so it is really a dramatic account, and they have extraordinary slides. They are two organizers, which is, I think, why they were not given visas, but they're organizing around protecting the architectural patrimony. Now, that is, of course, a political act as well in a city like Lahore. So I am really sorry that they're not here. But we're setting up a website, linked to my website, where we can put all these papers and the images, etc. So also theirs. Now, let me introduce this is Oi Yuki, who is now an assistant professor, congratulations, I don't know, at Nanzan University in Nagoya. Both of these extraordinary, when they were doctoral students, translated my book, The Global City, into Japanese, which was a nightmare of a job. I will also say that every translator of a book, of mine at least, detects a mistake. They were fearless. They have produced the Japanese translation of The Global City, has eliminated all the errors that were in the English, so I recommend the Japanese version of it. So you will, I don't know how you've organized your time, but you have very little time. Yes. The second speaker I will already say now is Kaoko Takahashi, who is at the Institute of Asia Pacific Studies at Waseda University.
Okay.
Yuki.
Well, both Kaoko and I will have a presentation under the title, Staging Cosmopolitanized Foreigners in Renationalizing Tokyo. In this presentation, we'd like to show how development of Tokyo as a global city has been partly supported by renationalizing process of the city. This tendency has become clearer in the last several years when Mr. Ishihara took his office of the governor of Tokyo in 1999. And Mr. Ishihara, as a governor, was elected twice with the mantra, Tokyo will change Japan. As this slogan indicates, he strongly opposes a long-standing plan to disperse too much concentrated functions of the capital, that is, administration, legislation, and judicature. He advocates that instead of dispersion, Japan should tap Tokyo's historic and cultural heritage as a resource for further development of the country as a whole. His strong attachments to Tokyo as the capital led the Tokyo Metropolitan Government to run a bid to host the 2016 Olympic Games. And according to the statistic taken this year, 75% of Japanese people support this bid. In this presentation, we are going to show you how people are renationalized while the government attracts and mobilizes them with the appeals to universal values such as eco-friendliness, conflict resolution, peace, and diversity. In order to do this, first, we'd like to begin by introducing some basic facts and history of the development of Tokyo. After that, we introduce how the Japanese and Tokyo governments have advanced globalizing economy. And then we elaborate on its two results, that is, production and consumption of cosmopolitanized foreigners and renationalizing Tokyo. In the end, how such a phenomena, which seems incompatible, has been made compatible by using as an example Tokyo's bid for hosting the 2016 Olympics will be explained. Now let's begin. The most distinctive characteristic of the post-war development of Tokyo is this: state-guided economic development based on manufacturing, domestic procurement of labor and capital, and small and medium-sized corporations. And during this time in the 1950s and 60s, there was a prevailing discourse that Tokyo's growth was equal to the national growth as a whole. Therefore, flourishing of Tokyo would lead to nationwide development, that is, rapid economic development. But being influenced by the globalizing economy, both Tokyo government and national government needed to adjust their economic policies to globalization. As a result, in 1980s, deregulation and privatization were advanced, and in the late 1990s, redevelopment projects were promoted. And at that time, building infrastructures was believed to an investment for future development on the more competitive global stage. And as a result, cosmopolitan space has emerged. Such influence of the globalizing economy has made Tokyo a nodal point of economically linked cities within and outside Japan, and has borne two different tendencies. First, space which does not embody any nationality has created that can be described geography over anywhere. For instance, the office of the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, this one, designed by Tange Kenzo, the world's famous architect, and the skyscrapers around the TMG office, this one, in the west part of Shinjuku, are good examples. And this TMG office is in Shinjuku. And it's commonly believed that this building was designed after the Notre Dame Shrine of Paris. And in addition, space targeting for high-income people has been created one after another. And these are examples, and they are called Roppongi Hills and Tokyo Midtown. And what these two are different from those described, like Tokyo Government Office, is that while the prior examples, buildings in the Shinjuku area, are spaces for either administration or business, but buildings in Roppongi are primarily consumption-oriented area. Thus, Roppongi Hills and Tokyo Midtown shown in this picture are where business, consumption, meaning shopping and eating, and residence are connected. And they're also known as one of the most expensive to live and buy things. As described, a space, such space erases nationality, which means only looking at these pictures don't give you any hint where these buildings belong. So by that sense, we say it, erasure of nationality. In this way, as Tokyo became economically globalized, space of anywhere increased its presence. At the same time, huge space which clearly embodies nationality has been also created. Unlike buildings of non-nationality, geography of anywhere, most of them are consumption-oriented. Examples are European Asian images. And this place is called Venus Fort in Odaiba, and it's a shopping mall. And the architecture was designed after 18th to 19th century Europe. And here Europe signifies something fashionable. And this one is called the Italian Avenue in Shiodome, and Shiodome is one of the newly redeveloped districts in Tokyo. And this one represents East Asia and called Little Hong Kong. So thus, even though the space embodied certain nationality like this picture that I showed, they've been designed to have universal appeals to attract consumers from as many countries as possible. Such a various use of foreigners together with erasure of nationality can be described, we think, called cosmopolitanized foreignness. And there's been another end to the influence of globalizing economy. That is renationalization of Japanese people as well as Tokyo. There are two backgrounds to this. First, due to the economic policies, public spending on welfare was diminished. Second, after the bubble economy collapsed, Japan has struggled with economic downturn. But in the last couple of years, more and more full-time jobs have been turned into non-full-time jobs, and the number of temporary and part-time workers have tremendously increased. And this table shows the result. This is a table of the number of paid labor by income cohort. And many people, as a result of the globalizing economy, experience decrease in their income to the extent that they become so-called working poor. And as you can see from this table, the number of lower income has increased. In particular, the group of annual income of $10,000 to $20,000. The emergence of the working poor, or they could be called internet cafe refugees in Japan, gathered much public attention. Consequently, the tie between individuals and the nation has loosened, and some people became unsure about where they belong. Such uncertainty about themselves and the nation has fed a sense of non-belonging. As a response, things which could give reassurance and enable people to have confidence have become popular. That is nostalgia for Showa. Showa is a time period of Japan which begins in 1925 and finished in 1989. And the nostalgia for Showa repeated several times in the past, but this time, 1950s and 60s, or Showa 30s, is the very period become very popular and attracts many people. And here are several images of this. And the message they conveyed to the audience and reader is this: we are still poor, but full of hopes for the future growth, and neighbors were much more hospitable to each other. So it was during this time of Showa 30s or 1950s and 60s when Japan as a whole began to experience industrialization, economic growth. And the national government expressed to and tried to impress the international community such growth in the Tokyo Olympic Games of 1964. This event marked the recovery from the defeat in the World War II, and Japan became one of the developed countries. At this time, it was nation's economic growth as a country which led Tokyo's growth, not vice versa. Thus, nostalgia for Showa, poor but very happy, functions to give a sense of identity where one belongs, and reassurance to people who felt discarded by the government under the influence of globalizing economy. And such process of renationalization of oneself is not a simple antithesis to the West. Thus, the renationalization which is happening recently in Japan is not born out of a conventional hatred regarding foreign as an uncountable alien. Now we'd like to go on to move on to how do they coexist. Okay. In this way, two tendencies have been observed. That is cosmopolitan foreignness and renationalization of Tokyo. So when you visit Tokyo, you will see the phenomenon which seems incompatible. That is cosmopolitan place of geography of anywhere on one hand, and Tokyo being renationalized on the other hand. Now how do they coexist? Recently, the coexistence of the two tendencies has become even more obvious in the Tokyo Metropolitan Government's campaign and bid for hosting the 2016 Olympics. In the final part of our presentation, we quickly would like to use this as an example of the Olympics to demonstrate how they have been made coexist. The Tokyo Metropolitan Government advocates in its principle issued in 2006 that Tokyo should host the Olympics for 4 reasons. First, Tokyo can be a model for the world. According to the government, Tokyo has reached maturity through tackling the problems born in the process of the economic growth. As a result, Tokyo has become a sustainable society in terms of the environment and lifestyle. Thus, TMG places Tokyo beyond growth, but at the maturity. They say, the world needs Tokyo as an example of how to confront and solve the problems we all face. Second, Tokyo as a mature city beyond growth should host the Olympics because it symbolizes how far Asia has developed. Asia, once called the stagnant Orient, is now the most dynamically developing space with diversity and various way of lives. And Tokyo will be able to fully enjoy such dynamics and to produce new value out of diversity. Third, Japanese hospitality can contribute to make the Olympics more festive. Such an inspiration drove a movement called the Olympic Game Movement. And the government uses Japaneseness represented in the openness traditionally seen among Japanese people to welcome tourists from all over the world. Fourth, dynamics of Tokyo will change Japan for the better in terms of economics and giving confidence. And it's fair to say such advocacy connotes 3 points. First, Tokyo government positioned the city as a cosmopolitan one, which has an appeal to universal values. Second, the government attempts to understand and utilize Asian development in the context of Tokyo. Third, the government strategically nationalized openness and hospitality of Japanese to mobilize Japanese people to the Olympic movement. In this way, renationalization of Tokyo and Japanese people proceeds in a way that is neither exclusive nor anti-foreign, so that it could have an appeal to foreigners. And we'd like to conclude by saying that in Tokyo, staging cosmopolitanized foreigners and renationalization go hand in hand. However, Governor Ishihara, while promoting such cosmopolitan atmosphere, is well known for his offensive attitudes to foreigners and immigrants. Therefore, a question whether this friend relation continues for long or collapse soon remains to be seen. That's all from us. Thank you.
So we'll take questions now, if there are. Please come to the... Great. Are there any questions? Well, let me just, I think that you produce a very two interesting conjunctures. One is the globalizing of Tokyo, which then leads to this renationalizing. And at the same, not necessarily the same things are globalized and are renationalized, right? But then the second conjuncture is this notion of wanting, I assume in a context of some renationalizing, right? Wanting the Olympics, and hence valuing and parading, if you want, this cosmopolitanism which you achieve through foreignness or something like that, like a foreign cosmopolitanism. In other words, the cosmopolitanism of the Japanese themselves wouldn't count, right? What you want, is that a bit the story or not? So is there some sort of, is there an isomorphism in these two periods? In other words, the 1980s, and in there you have an argument also that it is not the growth of Tokyo that drives the globalizing of the Japanese economy, but it is actually a national process. Is that what you said? Did I hear you say that or not?
Maybe I should answer the question. Thanks for your comment and a valuable thought to our presentation. And our, actually, the line of the presentation is this. The first discourse in the 1950s and the 60s during the Showa 30s period, as Yuki already explained, Tokyo's growth was equal to the national development. So the Tokyo was symbolized as the kind of icon for the national development. But after the globalization comes out during the let's say the 1970s, the Tokyo can be detached from the national development. So Tokyo can be function as a global city, separate from the national development. But in fact, right now, what's going on right now is actually Tokyo, again, can be utilized as a symbol for the national development. So that's the reason why Japanese government and the Tokyo Metropolitan Office are trying to attract the Olympics game, because Olympics game is a good chance for the Tokyo and Japan to appeal. Tokyo is still there. Although the Shanghai, Hong Kong, Beijing comes out and rising, but Tokyo can be the leader of the Asian region. That's the kind of the story behind this.
Yes. Any question or comment? I don't want to. One final, then the title. Develop just a bit. Maybe you can do that. The category that is in your title, the title of this paper, the foreignness. Right? Mm-hmm. What is it here? It's a title that you have in here. You know what I'm talking about, right? Oh, it's not in here, right? But develop the category just a bit for us. I mean, I'm saying 1 minute.
Oh, you mean a definition, or?
Well, what is it? How are you using? Is it? I mean, it seems to me that it is an ironic category. Mm-hmm. So just give it a bit of, because where does the foreignness come in? Mm-hmm. How is the foreignness constituted? Mm-hmm. And what is it that you see, using that category, what is it that you are seeing, right, that they're doing? And so...
I don't know this, I can give you a clear answer to your question about, foreignness. But the foreignness actually that we think of as the concept that can be manipulated by the government, like not only government but also private sector, who promote a redevelopment project. Because like the image of the European cities and the Asian city can be consumed as a product. So that's the reason why actually we use the foreignness as a kind of the political maybe orientation or the political will that the government can actually appeal and sell the image of the Tokyo as a global city.
Right. Is the foreignness just that visual order that they install, or is the foreignness also constructed in a different way?
Oh, actually,
you showed us striking images, right, of the Italian, the Venus fort, and I mean, this is extraordinary. I mean, already in the 1980s, Tokyo tried to project internationalism by having foreign architectural sort of, visual moments. But is that all today in your analysis? Is it more of that visual stuff? Or is the foreignness also, constituted through other means?
Maybe if we can analyze the thing by stage, I mean the historical stage, maybe like, as you said, 1980s and the 1990s, maybe redevelopment by using a foreignness is just like, the superficial things. Right. But right now, when we think of like immigration policy, we just decide to employ and introduce, foreigners from the Philippines and Indonesia. So we try to fill up some what we miss so far in terms of foreigners, like attracting more foreign laborers. So time has changed, and I think we can actually accomplish the foreignness, not only the kind of the physical structure, but also the kind of the legislative structures too.
But the government is not thinking of working class immigrants as part of this. Okay, fine. Just want to make sure that I had that right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And now I want to introduce Professor Xiang Xu, who is assistant professor in the Department of Geography and Resource Management at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Is it everything there all right? Or yes. She's working on a number of projects on urban and regional development in China. She has published widely on this subject, and she is the author of a book called Urban Development in Post-Reform China, State, Market, and Space, which was published by Routledge in 2007. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Sasson. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation, and also thanks for putting a lot of effort to put this section together. I know it's very time-consuming, not easy. And I would like to thank the sponsor as well for their supporting to let us settle in this very exciting and beautiful city, but at the same time, very, very expensive city of the capital, the cultural capital of Europe. Thank you. And then talking about China, and perhaps the most important phenomenon in China, in this country, is urbanization. And so urbanization will be a very important background to understand the state reconstruction in contemporary Chinese city. Now, the process of urbanization in China is unparalleled in the world history, and not only more than 1/3 of the population is now living in the cities and town, but the remaining is increasingly dependent on cities and towns for its economic survival and livelihoods. And urbanization has even become a very important national strategy nowadays. So against this background, and China has entered into a period of fast growth of urbanization. And as you can see, the urbanization level was a little bit more than 20% in the early 1980s, and this figure increased to more than 40% in 2003, and to the current 45%, right? So according to some estimation by Chinese experts, the urban population in China is going to reach like 1.1 billion, and with the urbanization level as high as 75% in 2050. And this is a huge, astonishing figure. This means that there are going to be more than 600 million people that were removed from the rural area to urban district at that time. At that time, we're going to have 50 actual large cities with a population of more than 2 million, and 150 big city with a population between 1 to 2 million, and 500 medium-sized city with a population between 0.5 to 1 million, and 1,500 small cities. So while these figures are predictable, other forces like globalization and the mega-city region development will reinforce the role of cities and their region as the center of production, as well as consumption, as well as political and social transformation. So urbanization at such a scale and speed has overwhelmed the Chinese government at various levels. So that's why we have so many problems. And for example, the flood of rural-urban migration has worsened the infrastructure burden of the city and leading to a huge number of unserviced urban areas where millions of migrant workers lack adequate access to basic urban services. And at the same time, we have this huge expansion of urban built-up area which needs to very severe urban sprawl and some other related questions like misuse of land, construction, poorly maintained infrastructure, and even traffic congestions. So to inadequately address this issue, we have recently seen a process of state reconstruction in China, and which is a topic I'm going to discuss today, and which is also a topic that has been largely ignored by current research and study on China. So let me first start by a very brief review of the current theory and discussion on urban Chinas. Perhaps many of you have already noticed that we have a rapidly developing urban literature on urban China, but I would like to argue that too many authors have focused on one particular area of urban transformation in China, that is decentralization and the increasingly significant role of the local state in such a transformation. And for example, it is argued that the distinctive decentralized form combined with the proper incentive allow the local state to play an increasingly cooperative role, and the similar theory has developed in this way. And it is also argued that central governments, and even though still politically dominating, has become less dominant in less relevance in local economic governance because of a serious reform package like the physical reform, decentralization, land and housing reform. And that the formal centrally organized institution is now undergoing a process of de-hierarchization, which gives rise to a process of territorialization of the place-based social and economic institution urban developments. So these ever-developing discourses actually suggest a widely recognized and intensively researched phenomenon in China. That is decentralization, the rapid downward radiculation of state function to lower level of social institutional organization. And this downscale state function is said to result in a process of territorialization in which the territorial governments has been granted a lot of power, can be able to build up their jurisdictional capacity to manage all economic activity within the jurisdiction regardless of affiliation. So in this sense, they argue that the urban development is being increasingly attached to and embedded in process and territory on the subnational scale. So with this theoretical interpretation, it is very, very tempting for us to read the contemporary urban transformation in China owning at the major consequences of decentralization process. But what's wrong with this theory when we apply them into the Chinese context? Can they explain everything? For example, can they explain why the Tianjin-Binhai region has been chosen as a new national growth engine? Or can they explain why local governments has been trying very hard and do whatever they can to try to attract the central policy support and physical allocation? And it is true that decentralization and territorialization are very important phenomenon, but they are only one side of the changing urban governance. They ignore a counter trend in which I think at least equally important for us to understand the economic governance today. So we argue that the process of urbanization, of the decentralization, is actually counterbalanced by the rise of state strategy to control the articulation of skill through which a more centrally consolidated power can be achieved. So this is why I want to elaborate on this point, because our recent research seems to suggest that there is a many aspects of urban transformation that's been undergoing a process of re-centralization and deterritorialization. And this provides a very fundamental basis for us to build a new state theoretical perspective behind the rapidly developing urban transformation in China. So, so the discussion so far sounds very, very theoretical. So let me give you very briefly, two cases to explain why we need to hold such a theoretical stand. Now, the first case is about urban land governance, urban land use power. And before economic reform, the land use power were actually scattered, very surprisingly, among different production units and institutions because they were the land user and manager. So this system makes the territorially organized land development very difficult, if not totally impossible. But the system was changed under the 1986 Land Administration Law, and in which the territorial governments was granted a lot of power to perform a wide range of land use function, and which means the fragmented land units was now put under the unitary control of the territorial governments. But however, the system changed again in the 1998 Land Administration Law, and at this time, the territorial power of the government has been taken back by the provinces and the central governments for better regulation. So this is the whole process of re-centralization of land power. And accompanying this is the process of re-hierarchicalization, or you can call it deterritorialization of land administration. I just want to give you a very short example. And previously, the local guardian of land development were used to be appointed by the territorial government, but nowadays they have to be appointed by the land department at the less higher level. So this is a case to indicate the intention to enhance the hierarchical structure of the government for better regulation. Now, so we have a considerable evidence to indicate the state reconstruction in China. Now, this trend is also evident in the second example. And some of you might know that the megacity region in China has undergone significant transformation. They are becoming very, very polycentric. And one good example is the Pearl River Delta in Guangdong in South China. And this is a region which has been coined as the world factory. And so the region has seen the decline of the traditional center production and the rise of new areas that are turning out to be more dynamic by taking advantage of capital flow and technological changes. So in the past, the region only have one or two clearly defined central cities, but today it has become increasingly polycentric with a number of star emerging cities competing aggressively with the traditional center production hosting economic activity. So because of this fragmented regional formation, the collective action problem and political obstacle associated with regional coordination are substantial, and in many cases simply insuperable, like pollution, high-intensive use of scarce resources, and other attributes of a fragmented growth that threaten the sustainability of city continue to worsen, and they are very profound in their impacts. So the provincial government say, okay, let's do a regional strategic plan in order to regain the control or reassert its functional importance in such a growing complexity of regional governance. So they have made this regional plan, and the basic idea is to re-centralize the power. For example, the Pearl River Delta has been classified into 9 policy zones. This is 9 policy zone, and all the 9 policy zone has been put under 4 different levels of control. At the top level is, which is called the supervisory governance, which is subject to the strongest top-down control, and the bottom is a conductive governance, which is subject to the least top-down control. For example, cities and regions and towns at the regional open space, they are not allowed to make independent decisions like what they used to be, and neither can they alter any, defined land uses. So these 2 examples, land governance and regional strategic planning, force us to form our new theoretical perspective to look at the urban transformation in China. Here, I just want to summarize several points for us to build a new theoretical stand. And first, we admit that there is a very powerful force of fragmentation and decentralization in China, and because of this, a decentralized structure has been justified as a very basic institutional precondition for promoting territorial growth. And under this context, problems such as local disobedience, spatial fragmentation, and social exclusion are very common. And indeed, the decentralization and fragmentation has been grown remarkably in the past decade, but even this trend is now counterbalanced by a wave of consolidation that cannot be ignored. As Professor Saxon has argued, the more structure is fragmented, the more centralized the top-level control operation might become in the global, imagine the global cities network. So our discussion also suggests that regulatory land use power or strategic planning that emphasize the re-centralization power or hierarchical relationship for more centralized power is becoming the new way of the state to evolve in the space commodification. So all this indicate a resurgence of state regulatory power, right? So these two cases are only, very a little dimension of changes in which the counter-train might be constructed. We have many other areas that happen in the same direction on different scale in different area. So in this sense, I want to argue that the new interpretation of the urban commodified urban transformation in China should be understood by underscoring the interplay between the decentralization and territorialization and the counter-trends of re-centralization and hierarchicalization. And that is end of my presentation. Thank you. Too fast.
This is very interesting work, very. Questions. We're going to go up till 7:15, 7:20 because we started late. So any questions or comments? I mean, you did such a good job, I must say. You covered everything, frankly. One
in less than 15 minutes.
Because if nobody has questions, then I think we should just move to the next speaker.
Probably you want to move, okay. Do you want to move to the next speaker?
You have a question? Okay, then come, yes. And Luis, prepárate para allá.
Thank you for the presentation. Volkan Yılmaz from Bosphorus University, Istanbul, Turkey. I wonder if the centralization that you're talking about is centralized in an organizational form vis-a-vis the local governments. Because in Turkey, what we face is the emergence of a centralized authority on urban land. And it gained a lot agency vis-a-vis the local governments, and because of local governments are somehow democratically accountable, limiting the agency of local governments leads to the commodification process. So I wonder if there's such a link in China too.
No, yeah, and in answering your question, I think I have to go back to what the state what it used to be before the economic reform. Before economic reform in China, we didn't have any market. So the state actually performed a commanding function in almost every aspect of the economy, such as resources distribution and whatever you can think of, because they took off everything. But after economic reform, we have the market, right? And the market played a very important role in China, even though some of you may feel very surprised that, how come? Because the Chinese state is still very dominating. How come the market play a very dominant role? Yes, market play a very dominant role in China, but the state, the function of the state has been redefined by the market imperative. For example, the state has to build up, especially the state has to build up the regulatory power to regulate the market, because we have so many spatial fragmentation going on in China. The local government has a lot of power and autonomy. So the state has to build up its regulatory power. And this function is fundamentally different from those that we can observe during the pre-reform period. I don't think it's come to a conflict between the re-centralization and the local discretion, because we're talking about the enhancement of regulatory power of the state. Yeah. Rather than,
you can continue discussing it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was just great. Luis. Now I'm happy to introduce Luis Rifo, who is an economist. He studied at the University of Liverpool and at the Catholic University in Chile. You're basically from Chile, no? Vos sos chileno?
Yes.
Yes. And he is now a researcher of CEPAL and also a researcher at the Institute of Urban Studies at Catholic University in Santiago, which is really one of the best urban institutes, if not the best, in Chile. He does research on social transformation of the metropolitan region of Santiago.
Okay, thank you very much. First, the frog for the luck. I'm going to put it here. Okay, I would like first to thank Saskia Sassen for her kind invitation to this forum. And my presentation will be focused on one of the recent and most important debates in urban research in recent years, which is the global dual city debate. This is a debate which has been leading by Saskia herself, Manuel Castells, and other authors like Chris Hamnet and others, and Edmond Pretichel also, and Luis César de Queiroz in Brazil. And so my presentation is going to be based on a research project that was conducted by an academic team of the Catholic University, guided by Professor Carlos de Matos, and that include Gloria Yáñez, Jimena Salas, and myself. In this research, what we have tried to do is to test if Santiago, the capital of Chile, was following similar trends proposed by the global dual city approach. So let me present our main findings. Probably the title is too general because it's globalization and urban labor markets, Latin American perspective. It should say a Chilean perspective because there are important differences between Chile and other countries of Latin America. First, the questions. Toward which kind of social urban worlds are we moving? This was one of the questions that moved our research team. Do we have only one similar path for all the big metropolitan areas of the world? What kind of internal social transformations are big metropolitan areas experiencing? Well, global city theory, I'm going to put it here first. Let me put it here. Okay, global city theory stresses that transformations in the metropolitan economic base caused by the deepening of its insertion into the global economy tend to generate a dual socio-occupational structure. This is one of the first ideas. Second, new dynamic activities. Okay, okay, that's part of the debate. I don't use dual. Okay, Castells uses more specific. Okay, new dynamic activities, mainly advanced producer services and high technologies industries, are characterized by a strong demand of highly qualified employee demand and high income jobs and low qualified, low income jobs. This is the, okay. Second, this phenomena produce a dualistic occupational structure because there is an increase in the demand for higher qualified occupation and at the same time for lower qualified, as I said. In time, this dualization of social structure will have a spatial impact, transforming cities into places characterized by dual spaces. This is the basic thesis that we wanted to test in Chile. So there are two main perspectives in this debate. One, the increasing segmentation of urban labor market is producing social and spatial polarization, which in turn will produce the emergence of dual cities. And second, the evolution of labor markets is characterized by a growth and expansion of new middle groups, and not polar dual scenario. This trend, however, could exist in society with strong inequalities. It is important to make the difference between dualization and polarization versus income disparities. It's not the same. I'm going to try to explain why. First, let me introduce Santiago de Chile. It's over there. Let me see, here, the capital. Then this is the metropolitan area of Santiago, which is inside the metropolitan region of Santiago, but it's nearly the 19% of everything, population, GDP. It is an area of 15,000 square kilometers, 2% of the continental territory of Chile, 6 million of inhabitants, 40% of total population, and near $45 billion, near 47 or 50% of total GDP. So we have in Chile a huge spatial concentration, geographical concentration. In green, we have the growth of metropolitan region of Santiago. In red, the average of the country. You can see that Santiago grew faster in a period of the most intense globalization process since 1985, more or less. So the metropolitan region of Santiago is a winner place. It's winning in this dynamic, the general dynamic. Which economic activities grew faster? you can see, as stated by Saskia and others, services, the most dynamic activities, particularly you can see finance and producer services is at the top with commerce, restaurant and hotels, and also transport and communication. Some global activities are behind these figures. This is in terms of GDP of the metropolitan regions of Santiago. In terms of employment, you can see the same trend. In first place, this is the growth of annual growth from 86 to 2005. Finance and producer services are the most dynamic activities. So we are very near of what global city says, what global city theory says. So what we do for testing the dual polar scenario, we use a methodology that was used also by Chris Hamnet and Petitschel. We look at the socio-occupational structure, ranking from highest occupational activities to lower occupation activities in terms of qualification and skills. So you can have here from higher socio-occupational activities to lower socio-occupational activities. The most important finding here that I would like to stress is this group here, clerical, technicians, and middle professional. One of the problems of this research was to define middle groups. It's a very relative term. So the most close definition that we have and the most strict definition that we should have was this clerical, technicians, and middle professionals. There could be some middle groups here in comments and services, but we didn't have the disaggregation to put some groups in each other. Sorry. So what can we see here? Which group grew faster? What we call middle groups. Middle groups grew like 5 percentage points between 1992 and 2002, which the years of the population census. But also, higher managers and professionals grew 2.4 percentage points, and commerce and services activities also grew. The faster the follow. No. Yeah.
Rates for each individual, right?
It's percentage point.
Or is it the share in the workforce?
No. The chair is here. Okay. Here is the chair. Okay. So here you can see the. Okay.
Which is the usual thing, no?
Yeah.
That you have a very broad middle section.
Exactly. Okay. So middle groups are increasing their chairs in terms of employment, in terms of absolute numbers, of volume, But this is not the same as inequality or disparity. Here we have the income distribution for Greater Santiago from 1997 to 2007. And first, you can see a very bad income distribution because the 20%, the richest 20% in 2007 received 51.9% of the total income, while the 20 poorest percent, 5.4. However, if you see the trend, you can see a small improvement in terms of the increase of middle group. This is the growth of the 40% of middle groups in terms of percentage point. Yeah. So middle groups went over here to here. They gain. Yes. Let me see. Something happened. Oh, wait. No, but okay. Okay. So let me. This is not working. Okay. So what happened in spatial terms? We have seen that middle groups increase. So for the analysis of spatial patterns, we use a range looking at districts of metropolitan regions of Santiago, the relative share of each group inside a district. The darker the colors, the higher the presence relative share of each group. I'm going to show you only 2 groups because of the time. So first, I'm going to show you the higher groups, higher managers and higher professionals. And you have here a problem, a blank. Can you put it? Okay. You have here the map for 1992 and the map for 2002 of higher groups. Santiago, the higher groups lives in Santiago in the east side of the city, and you can see that in between 1992 and 2002, the higher groups reinforce their share in the east side of the city first. Yeah? Here, you can see the color, the more dark color. But also, they start to appear in another part of the city, not only the east side, but also in some parts of the south and in the center of the city. Okay, and let me show you first. This is workers. We have seen that workers fell. This is 1992. The workers, they were more in the north and the south parts of the city in terms of relative share, and you can see in 2002 a reduction, but the pattern is similar. They continue to be more intense in north and the south part of the city. And you can see the clear white space of the higher places of the city. Yeah, and now let me pass this. I'm not going to show you the non-qualified. I'm going to be more faster. Okay, this is the middle. This is 1992. Clerical is a desk. Huh? Okay, this is the map for 1992. You can see in the inner cities, inner east side of the city, the more intensive presence of middle groups, and this is 2002. So you can see an increase of, particularly in the inner city of Santiago, and some parts of the south also, but the middle group are spreading their relative presence in the Santiago city.
Can I ask you one question?
Yeah, sure.
If you just took professionals,
yeah.
You know, technicians, it can be a Xerox technician,
yeah.
Clerical can be a
yeah.
secretary. So if you just took professionals.
It's just professional, they started to increase here in the east side. Yeah.
So a lot of that other spread is more the lower income.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so conclusions. Okay. Professionals and especially technicians have experienced a significant increase in the socio-occupational structure, so increasing the middle groups. Second, middle groups show a greater spatial diffusion. Higher groups got stronger in only one part of the city. Commerce and services, I didn't show you, but in general show the highest spatial diffusion. And workers registered the high decrease, absolute and relative, in the whole socio-occupational structure. But this is important. The expanding middle groups, however, are characterized by different attributes than those middles of the 50s or 60s. They are not the same middles. This is the important part.
It's getting more and more exciting.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Okay, the frog is working. Yeah, okay. These middle groups, they are more private than publics. In the 50s and the 60s, middle were working basically in the state. Not all of them, but an important part of them. Middle groups are more involved in flexible and precarious employment relations. That middle groups are growing one cannot imply that they are getting better in terms of employment relation. They are getting involved in more precarious, flexible employment relation. So they don't have permanent and safe job like those middle of the 50s and 60s. Then they are more prone to consumption than the 50s or the 60s. Chilean society 40 years ago was characterized by small consumption. People were more, how can I say it?
They bake their own cake. So.
Yeah, that's something. Okay, something like that. But now they are eager to consumption, to go to places. And also, in general terms, they have less interest in getting involved in more collective or social institutions than those middle of the 50s or 60s, like trade unions, community organizations, and so on. Finally, in spatial terms, middle groups are expanding their relative presence, and in certain axes of the city, and also in the peri-urban, denoting a process toward more complex social urban spaces or landscape. I think this is the most important result or conclusion that we have. Related with this, the expanded middle groups are tending to collide with lower groups in several parts of the inner city, generating incipient gentrification process, not huge incipient, but incipient generation process. So what I would like only to stress is that we are living in the Chilean case towards a more complex urban landscape. And I believe, I'm not going to put it here, but I believe that the difference is politics. Politics in terms of policy. Since the beginning of the 19th, the new democratic governments that came after the dictatorship started to put more emphasis in social policy, in some kind of labor regulation, some kinds, but also in a huge promotion of education. And many people from the last 20 years in Chile has increased their average scholarship, and that's, I think, is one of the points that could be important for this. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you. Now, I would say, because I know that the drinks are being served outside, at least I hope there are drinks, but is there an urgent question? What was that? Okay. Yes.
Question.
So one question, and then we can continue discussing it afterwards, because I have a lot of questions. Muy interesante.
Thank you very much.
I can't resist this, because I would agree entirely. There is a more complex urban landscape. And if I'm right with my periphery thing, what happened is that the peripheries became parts of it at least became middle class. And so this process
exactly.
There are different, the peripheries of today is not the peripheries of the 60s. And part of what used to be peripheries is middle class today. So you have an incredible complexification that do not necessarily has to be only with the labor market, but has to be with urban transformations per se, and consumption. Anyway, just wanted to see if you can comment on that.
Yeah, I think that that's the appropriate conclusion, because we have a more complex societies. There has been a modification in social policies, the role of the states, and so on. And this has a special impact, like those stressed by Saskia. The city is a part of more global social processes, politics, states, the labor markets, and so on. And in the case of Chile, I'm not saying that this is the case of all Latin American countries, because Chile has a particular economic and social trends since 1985 and so on. But I think that the urban landscape is getting more complex, more diverse, and yeah, that could be.
Excellent, really great.
Thank you.
Before we end, I must thank the darling Dutch Foundation of the research arm of the Dutch government, who put in the funding to bring all these scholars to Bergen. I asked for that. I never thought it would happen. And then came the Dutch to rest. So I also want to thank them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.